right, part 2, the Hemi Gremmie is gonna happen. Apparently, the commitment that I've been like had my arm twisted is that it has to do burnouts by the end of this episode. If you didn't see the last episode of Roadkill, you don't know that we are finally building one of my long-term dreams. It's the Hemi Gremmie. Yep, this is our 1975 AMC Gremlin that we're turning into a full-on 1970s street freak. We've dropped the body onto a modified Model A chassis, and we're stuffing a 426 Hemi under what's left of the hood. It's kind of the same as the last time you saw it, except we sent it off to Lucky. He put a fuel tank in the back, like a basic boat tank, and plumbed half of that and plumbed half the brakes, and it's on us. We got a lot to do.
Yeah, all that's left is everything.
Which is why we brought Andrew and Matt back in order to help us out. Okay, ready?
I just wanna, you go that way, I'll go this way, and yeah.
Whoops. Wow, look at the organization right there.
Yeah, when the project is this huge, it will not fit on an ordinary pizza box.
Yeah, there's a lot of really big stuff that needs to happen. Remember on the last episode we were working with the front suspension, we had that transverse leaf spring that was collapsing? Well, it's now actually bent all of its brackets on the front axle from being trailered to Lucky's and back. All the steering's gonna have to change, which is on the same list. Headers are gonna have to get made, wiring, drive shaft, plumbing. Oh, just getting the intake manifold installed and all of the linkage and all the plumbing to that is gonna be big. I have to change out the transmission to a different one that Gearstar sent that's full manual valve body, and everything else is just little itty bitty stuff. Tunnel ram time. We're gonna install the base for real.
Dun, dun, dun. I like this part.
Looking good. This manifold we're installing is an early 70s Y-end. And you could get a lid for these that would take Dominators, but I'm using a couple of 4150s, the smaller footprint carburetor.
Dude, magnesium would be cool.
One of the things about these Hemi manifolds and also about Windsor Fords is because the angle of the manifold sits like this, but the bolts are straight up and down, you have to like tighten them really, really carefully, and you have to go around and around and around and around in circles.
Just when you think they're all tight, go around again.
All right, let's tear the front suspension off. We're gonna touch the ground. The first suspension I tried on this thing was a transverse leaf spring, which is like old school street roddy kind of stuff. It's like original Model A stuff, and unfortunately, we didn't calculate that the Hemi was gonna be this heavy and this far forward of the axle, and there's just no way that it's ever going to work. So we're gonna end up taking the entire front axle out of this, and the transverse leaf spring, and these hairpins that locate the front end, and we're gonna replace it all with another straight axle and some leaf springs, parallel leafs, just like a 4x4. The thing is, with the transverse leaf, you need these hairpins to locate the axle, whereas the leaf springs themselves locate the axle both, you know, this way and this way and this way. So it's a much simpler setup. It also distributes the weight over 4 points on the frame instead of having 1 point in the middle just riding on the axle on these brackets, which, by the way, have already bent. So we're just gonna get all this stuff out of here. All we have to do is take off the spring from the middle and take these off, and the whole junk comes out. Yeah. There we go. Boom. Easy. Okay. You got all the shims and everything all lined up?
Not yet.
And as soon as you get that in, this thing's flipping off the jack stands.
Yeah, kind of figured that.
Okay, you want to put the stands back here for safety. Mine won't go in.
I'm just gonna set it on the leaf.
Oh.
It'll slide on the leaf.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, just like that for now, just so we can see how much it moves.
Oh, wait, there we go. Okay. So what we're doing right now is just mocking up, putting some weight on the springs to find out how much they collapse when we have the load on them so that we can sort of eyeball all of this stuff together all at the same time. We also need to figure out if our new steering linkage, which is gonna go to the front of the axle instead of behind the axle, is gonna end up interfering with the springs. And we also need to guesstimate the steering angle and make sure that the tires aren't hitting the springs where we wanna mount them outboard of the frame. Boy, there's a lot of stuff to consider on like the simplest suspension ever, but we'll get it slowly.
Oh, yeah.
Spring's getting longer. Oh, there we go. Woo. Okay. I thought it was gonna go all the way.
Those look good.
And now it's basically 5 inch. It moved roughly 3/4 of an inch.
It's tall.
Okay, we've got the leaf springs mocked up in here, and we actually have weight on the spring by smashing it on the underside of the frame. Everything is supported on jack stands as far as the axle and everything, so the ride height isn't 100% accurate right now, but you can see it's way too high. So we've been able to determine how much that leaf spring is gonna squish and where we want to mount the top of the leaf spring to get our ride height to be correct. Okay, Matt just mocked up these outriggers that are hanging the leaf spring, and we have the full weight on the car, and the stance is actually really good. So I think instead of doing more measuring and thinking and figuring and squaring, we're just gonna weld it in because that's always the best answer. So he's gonna zap, and then we have to start worrying about shocks and steering box and steering column and all that stuff. Now that the leaf springs are hung, we've got the axle centered this way in the vehicle just by taking a bunch of measurements, and now we're setting the caster angle. So if you're looking dead into the side of the car like that, this is the kingpin. You want it angled back like that. That's caster. It's kind of like if you have a shopping cart and one of the front wheels is like wobbling all around, it doesn't have enough caster. If you lay it back just the right amount, it'll go in a straight line. So it's the same thing with front end alignment. So I think we're trying to eyeball about 8 degrees into it. Unfortunately, there's not a real flat spot to measure with a digital angle finder, so this is going to be a little bit of eyeballing.
This is really critical. Super important. It's not as sexy as making sparks, but
Okay, the leaf springs are hung, the caster is set, the axle is bolted to the springs. Next step is gonna be putting weight on the axle so that we can figure out exactly where the steering box is gonna get mounted to the frame and how the steering linkage is gonna work.
I gotta say, we are killing it. So much has been accomplished today, and we are this close to having a complete front suspension and steering system if it weren't for the fact that we're missing shocks and pieces of the steering system.